We're now live on YouTube with the July 2nd, 2019 meeting of the OpenJS standards team. Sandil, would you like to take it off?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the meeting, first meeting of OpenJS standards. And yep, so we have this. Okay, so let's discuss the things. I think, Yuri, you have the first item on the discussion.
Yes, so I wanted to update everyone on a item that came from, I think, multiple discussions, but mostly recently collaborated, and that is the status of the entity OpenJS Foundation at the W3C and ECMA International. A couple weeks ago, I took the item to introduce Michael Dolan, who is our interim executive director, to the secretariats, offices, plural, of these two organizations so that they could, figure out what, if any, paperwork or things need to be signed and updated. And happy to report that those items are already complete for ECMA International and functionally complete for the W3C as well. So, the end of the story here is that we're, back in, not that we really were not in good standing, but it's all clear and official that the folks operating from our communities are operating on the behalf of the OpenJS Foundation and not the JS Foundation as they used to be. So that is that's covered. Any questions or concerns?
Question, yeah. Particularly with ECMA, what does that practically speaking mean? For context for the question, I've been sort of active in, at least occasionally, in participating in ECMA 402 processes with respect to the Intel object and stuff around there, but purely as a sort of library developer and an expert completely from the outside. Would me being on the CPC mean that I might be able to have some more official role in that committee or whatever it's called technically, or is that something different? How does this work?
Great question. So we're what's known as a not-for-profit or NFP member of ECMA International. And these are, just your standard sort of like, universities and tech nonprofits and that kind of thing. That's how they view us. We are able to participate as not-for-profit members in different technical committees if we so choose, at the discretion of the Secretary General, which means they could at any time say, we're not invited anymore because we're not paying members. But if you want to be recognized for your participation as a delegate of OpenJS Foundation, you would be able to do so through our membership. And I hesitate to say, well, let's just do it now, because one of the things that I want to understand from our group is how we want to go about identifying technical committees or working groups that we want to participate in a formal capacity. So it's very clear to everyone who's participating that you are participating on behalf of the OpenJS Foundation and not as, say, an invited expert, if that makes sense.
That does make sense, and I would be interested in basically being a guinea pig for figuring out how does this work.
Well, one thing that we need to ensure of as well as we're going through this, there's kind of two bits that are important. One bit is making sure that the way in which we engage doesn't undermine the financial models of these institutions. So because our nonprofit is made up of a number of large companies, it in theory could be possible for companies to essentially utilize the foundation as a way to get into ECMA without paying dues. Emily, I believe that you are an independent, so that this wouldn't directly affect you, but like there's optics to how we engage in and what we engage in, how many people we send, how often we send them, how many different people we send. I think the other thing that's important to keep in mind is, as we are 31 different projects, I believe is the number, we need to make sure that we are representing those groups. So one of the things to keep in mind is that individuals are not members of ECMA, organizations are, individuals are delegates of those organizations. And generally, but not always, the intent is that individuals who come are representing their organizations as a whole. They're delegating for that organization. So we do need to make sure that if, at least this is my opinion, and please anyone hop in if I'm wrong, but that like if we are sending people, that those individuals are indeed representing the foundation, the interests of the projects, and not just going out of independent curiosity. And that's in no way claiming that that's what people are doing, but just it's important that I think we approach it with that ideology. And I know Richard Gibson has done some of this in the past for the JSF, so perhaps he has some bits to add about that.
I think that's actually a really good summary. As you said, membership is organization based. I'm probably, well, I don't know if I'm an unusual case. So I work for an organization that could in principle join ECMA, but in practice is not going to. And at the meetings, I will announce that association, but try to make clear that I'm a delegate of, well, I have been a delegate of JS Foundation, not of Oracle.
That's pretty much my situation as well. I mean, the company I work for, Vincit, is by no means anything like a name that is recognized, even like Oracle or anything else, but technically it could be a member of ECMA. And I think therefore trying to draw a distinction between what is an independent and a not independent member who is a participant of OpenJS would be a very tricky and sort of, I would rather not us be in a position where we have to draw the line and define those terms.
Okay. Is that in the respect to membership, you mean, or?
Meaning that we define somehow that what is an independent and a not independent person participating in OpenJS.
To be clear, I think it's less about us needing to define what's an independent versus a non-independent, more so than like and I don't even know if it needs to be defined, but we need to be like thoughtful and careful about how many representatives we send. And we should ensure that the people that are going representing us are in fact going with that hat on. And generally, you know, it's hard because you almost need to go to like 3 to 6 meetings just to get on-ramped enough to be productive. But at that point, you know, like, especially with the cost of travel and everything, I think there's a question of like, should we be sending people just to send people, or like, should we be sending people who have like very, very specific goals in mind with why they're going?
Definitely, but I would say that the number of cases that we as an organization need to deal with here is going to be limited enough that it probably makes very little sense, at least at this stage, to figure out what the rules are, and more likely deal with each individual case one by one.
I guess that's the difference, though, between us having like arguably elected delegates who are always expected to go to all meetings versus people who are stepping up to go to meetings to handle specific cases.
Okay.
Jory and those who are involved in the JSF, how are the individuals who went and represented the foundation chosen in the past?
That's a really good question. It obviously changed a lot over time. Back in just jQuery Foundation days, it was something that a subset of the team handled by, I assume, kind of figuring out among themselves, you know, who could go and who was best equipped, and were sending for a while 2 people, and that was Rick Waldron and Yehuda Katz. That shifted, and they went to every meeting pretty much, and then became, I think Tilda joined ECMA of their own, volition. And so then we started sending Leo and Rick, and then we decided that that was not a great idea because both of those people worked at Boku. And Maggie began working on the date stuff. And so that made sense. We wanted to kind of promote that work from Moment. Richard, I don't recall exactly how the decision was made for you to start joining, but you probably do. That was you and Chris, I think. Porchers were.
Yeah, I don't remember if he reached out to me or I reached out to him, but there were a few proposals that came from the work with JS Foundation, and because I was a principal on them, we figured it would make sense to be physically at the meetings where practical.
Yeah, I mean, I think, y'all, the takeaway is largely that it was handled by, a subset of the TAC, which was the Technical Advisory Committee of the JS Foundation. It wasn't, and it was kind of just more like what seemed most pragmatic, not that we had a real formal process.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
So that sounds a bit like if we were to draw on that basis, then effectively this standards group might be a not inappropriate body to continue making those decisions. But on the other hand, it does also sound like there's very little basis here to necessarily follow the past precedent of how this was made.
I think the thing we can take away from the past is that while we made some, I think, pretty pragmatic and practical choices based on what people were interested in at the time, we also didn't do a super great job surfacing the impact of those choices to the rest of the foundation, so that other populations and projects could reap the benefit of those connections. And that is key to a change that I would like to see made in how we proceed as the OpenJS Foundation. I'd like for it to be, I'd like for the standards group to make a bigger impact and to be talking about what we're doing in a way that, our project communities can see, wow, that adds benefit, that adds value. And, I'm glad that we're doing that. Before we just, we took care of business, but we did it in this like very just sort of quiet way that it wasn't, I don't think, as interesting and as impactful as it could have been.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I'm excited that OpenJS Foundation seems to have a more open forum in which to share, in which both to collect information about what matters and to share feedback about what progress has been made.
So to me, this conversation really speaks to an item that is a couple points down in the agenda about what our scope is and what it is that we want to do as a group of people. As I said, because these things have been updated with these organizations, we can continue doing what we've been doing, which is, not just a whole lot, sending 1 or 2 people to meetings from time to time, and then we could, develop some system of feedback where if Richard goes, there's a reporting, or if Brian goes as our AC rep, there's a report, stuff like that. But that maybe isn't the most exciting thing we could be doing. And I think it'd be pretty exciting to talk about the scope of what we want to do and where we want to see the return on that.
Okay. Does anybody has anything to add on it? Or can we move to the next topic?
I, I think like in general, it would be really good to have more cross-project discussion about what things are important that don't exist or need to advance. Because I think that plays a lot into what Jory was saying about like our value of representing. I'm honestly not entirely sure how to achieve that. So.
Well, is there anything in the charter that would speak to this?
In the CPC charter?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe so. As I understand it, it just describes the possibility for this CPC to have other working groups or committees that it itself charters and manages, but there's nothing specific to the standards.
So one thing that's worth considering with charters, at least the way that we handled it in the Node.js Foundation. So the board charters the CPC. The CPC can charter other groups just as it does charter projects. So we can put together a charter for this group and have that charter signed off by the CPC. And then we will, as a group, as a standards group, and we can determine how membership, like there's kind of like a bunch of things that you need in place to get it, but like basic governance down regarding membership and how changes are put together. We could put together a combination of governance and a charter and be chartered by the CPC. And this group can be self-regulating as far as like how all of those things work. One of the biggest things that we've tried to do in the past, although this may now change, was that we tried to put as little as possible into the charter and as much as possible into the governance doc. The charter generally requires the approval of a third party, whereas the governance doc can kind of move at whim. So that could be an exercise of something that we want to see if we want to be like an official working group or an officially chartered entity within the OpenJS Foundation that's chartered to own the engagement and standards, which is something that the CPC is chartered to do. You know, that is something that we can do as a group. But in case I wasn't like super clear about it, I would advise against making major changes to the CPC charter because all of that requires board approval. So we should try to do as much as possible without making those changes. But if it is necessary for us to do the work, then that's something that we should do.
I don't think there's any reason to make changes in the charter. The specific bit there that talks about this, easiest if I just read it. The CPC serves as the OpenJS Foundation's primary technical liaison body with external open source projects, consortiums, and groups, and is also responsible for ensuring that the OpenJS Foundation has appropriate technical participation in standards bodies by finding and encouraging members from individual projects to participate in these bodies. And if the chosen way to implement that by the CPC is to get a group like this group to take that work forward, I think that's entirely within the scope of what the charter is asking for.
Yeah, and that's exactly where, like, if this group then gets chartered with that responsibility, we can draft governance as to how that's handled. And if the CPC ever has an issue with that, you know, they could, in a scorched earth scenario, decharter this group, but, you know, more likely would come back with feedback to us, or perhaps not charter us until it's set up in a degree that people see as effective. I think in general, this is like a really great pattern to do. The CPC should be kind of pushing down its responsibilities as much as possible to groups that are hyper-focused on executing on them.
Great. Can we move forward to the next item now?
Can I make a comment?
Yep, sure.
Like, I find, you know, this is all really useful it's also like a little meta. And I'm wondering, in very practical ways, like is there something very simple that we can do that we're not doing, like have a GitHub issues space where projects can ask exactly that kind of question, like we think that X is really important, or we have a proposal and we would like to see if we can get, you know, a larger group of the JSF to support that together and work out whatever needs to be worked out before we go ahead and advocate for those things. Or I don't know, maybe that's a naive question for this group.
I think it's a great question, Brian. And like a very practical thing that I had suggested in the past that we could do is like a TC39 pre-meeting, for example, or a TPAC pre-meeting, something where we sit down and as a group go through the agenda and identify the things that we care about and make sure we're on the same page about the direction it's going. Like things like that seem like very practical things that this group could be doing.
100% plus one, what you said, Miles. That would be really super.
And that does help enforce what you were mentioning also earlier about making sure that the delegates of the OpenJS Foundation are representing the OpenJS Foundation and not any other entity.
Although I think at least in the W3C, you're free to like verbally switch your hat and say if you're speaking, you know, for yourself versus for your group, basically. Generally encouraged to share opinions if you have them.
Does W3C require corporate affiliation to be a member?
Yes, you have to, companies are members of the W3C, and there are a handful of people who are invited experts to specific working groups. Occasionally they're invited experts to the advisory council or to the advisory board. But you do need to be an entity in order to be a W3C member.
Yeah, so the working groups can invite whoever they want, and the AC is sort of like that too. But when the AC does that, it's sort of a one-off. For this particular meeting, we will call somebody in to present or discuss or whatever. But beyond that, then the rules are actually very lax. Like once you're a member, you can appoint anybody. They don't have to even be part of your organization. All the elected bodies, like we could nominate somebody who is not even part of the JSF if we thought that they were a really good candidate. In fact, that has become increasingly common. So.
And for the record, Brian Cardell here is the current advisory council representative for the foundation, because he was the JS Foundation's advisory council representative. So if you want to join a working group, you talk to him.
or if you accidentally get kicked off a working group because we switched the organization.
Or that. Did that happen to you?
Yeah, well, it happened to Chris.
Oh.
Chris got ejected from everything.
Oh dear. Side effect of that process. Okay, so I assume it's safe to maybe move to that scope question, and I said I put this in as an agenda item because I thought this very tactical thing that we're discussing right now, like doing pre-meetings for certain events or gathering feedback on proposals, or you know, maybe having just a sort of, you know, standards 101 webinar or something like that. These are very tactical, practical things that our group can be doing that doesn't require, the meta pieces that I think Brian and Miles were alluding to being maybe too much for right now. So I'd love to continue a conversation here that was kind of started before around scope, and ask us to kind of start to brainstorm other things we could be doing that kind of fit this group.
I think that the outreach things that Dan are doing are like a thing maybe we should invite a lot of our projects to. I don't know, like if there are ways that we can connect with standards discussions of some kind, that is sort of what those are. That seems like a helpful, just simple connector role. I don't know how many other things we have like that, but like other really, I mean, these are almost trivial examples, to be honest, but like the W3C Technical Architecture Group occasionally has like meetups where you can go meet with the steering committee for the web for the next 50 years and like letting people know that they can go hear what they have to say and like actually speak to them. It seems like a valuable thing. We have a lot of projects and a big voice, like helping disseminate that seems valuable.
Other things folks would like to see us?
No, but I have a question with respect to the meetups and connecting with the people. Do we already have a forum or somewhere we can go and talk with them? Do we already have, like, for example, in JS Foundation or with Node.js, has this been happening before? Or is there a medium in which we can go and talk with them or something like that? Is there available already?
I think it's been happening in a fairly informal way because there's just a cross-pollination of people who work in, who be attending TC39 or TAG or other working group meetings, and also attending events around the JS ecosystem. But in terms of like a formal communication channel between these groups, I don't think one really exists. And one thing that I think will be helpful for creating that is for the OpenJS Foundation to have a committee or a subgroup of folks who work on these sorts of things. Like that will help other groups interface with us more, obviously. But yeah, to answer your question, there's certainly nothing formalized.
Okay, yeah, getting it. Okay.
I do know, and apologies if this is not exactly speaking to your question, but Dan Ehrenberg, who couldn't make today's call, he's on vacation, has been running community outreach meetings. And I do believe that if you take a look at the OpenJS Foundation, like the proposals that we have, there are two stage 0 proposals. I'll drop them in the chat. One is called shared interfaces, and the other one is called standards outreach, that I think were about formalizing some of this work. The outreach one in particular was about doing outreach to different groups, and whether it's build tool outreach or JavaScript outreach or framework outreach. That proposal was about making that something that's a little bit more formalized. So that's a program that we could look at picking up as a group. The other one, the shared interfaces, is about kind of documenting interfaces that exist in multiple runtimes and trying to create, this is almost like something you might find on MDN, but a documentation source that makes it really clear, like, hey, you can use the URL object in the browser and in Node, but here are like the slight differences, stuff like that.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm curious if anybody has any like frustration about how this has historically gone, or frustration about, like, you know, how to get or find information, because that's some of the that's a thing I think that we could really help solve for our project communities and for the broader ecosystem, in terms of making it more clear what we're doing and that kind of thing.
Jory, I'm sure I just didn't understand what you were saying there. Can you like articulate the beginning part of that again?
Yeah, so I'm just curious to know if anyone who has been involved in how the JS Foundation has or Node Foundation, or any of the open source projects you're a part of, if there's any existing frustration with the way things have gone, and or with the way we've communicated about how things are going, and are there suggestions or ideas for how we can address that?
Yeah.
Partially to answer that, possibly. I was, for one, not really aware that the JS Foundation was participating in standards bodies work. I didn't really look into it, but this was not information that, you know, became available through me, through whatever channels. So one aspect that I hope we can deal better with is to just, you know, make people of all sorts informed that, hey, this is a thing we're doing, and through us, you too can, you know, have a say in these things, if you so wish.
Yeah, and I think from my personal perspective, who is, you know, new to, I mean, I've been to the TPAC meeting once, but who's kind of new into this standardization and foundation liaisons, given that someone who's come from an outside, making it easy for him to be able to contribute to certain things, I think is what I would like to see being improved in that sense. I mean, there's a lot of things already going on and happening, but yeah, it's always difficult without having a lot of context to start, you know, working and contributing and helping out in many ways.
So a question on that is, there's one, you can give like really general sorts of guidance that I guess probably already exists somewhere, but is, I imagine, hard to find and hard to follow, and creating another one is probably not going to dramatically help that situation. But if you were to participate, presumably as part of the JSF, one of the things that W3C does that I really like now is if you go to one of their events and it's like your first one or your first couple, you can request like a buddy. And that's exactly like, that is somebody who can help you navigate, and you can ask, you know, what you think are probably naive questions, but they're the same naive questions everyone has. But would that be a helpful thing in what you're talking about, or it's too specific?
Yeah, I think that could be definitely helpful, especially since I've seen that kind of program in other kind of different conferences where people from the outside world, unknown about the topic matter, can be, you know, have someone to ask those naive questions and get some more context about certain processes and things.
Yeah, right. I mean, they're not naive. They're actually usually really good questions. They just feel naive if you're from the outside. Right?
I definitely added a buddy system to the list in caps because I love the buddy system at the W3C. So +1. Okay, well, I would encourage everybody to think about other, you know, wish list or, you know, programming items that you would like to see us do either today or at some future state, because, you know, anything is possible. Well, not anything, but a lot of things are possible. Should we move to the next?
Yeah, I think we can move to the next item. It's also you already.
Okay. So the other open issue that we had was some clarification that we were looking for in terms of the budget for standards related travel. And I talked a little bit with Brian Warner from the OpenJS Foundation. He's our program manager, about this yesterday, just to, you know, get a sense that what the plan was for this weird year of 2019, where we were like part separate entities and part the same entity. And the JS Foundation had approved some travel budget for the standards work as they had done in previous years. And my understanding is that's holding for this year. But for the 2020 budget cycle, they are likely to want to just say, okay, CPC, here is a travel budget, here is one big budget, and we don't care if you use it for standards travel or if you use it for collaborator summit travel or if you use it for, you know, other travel to other events or other things. So that's hopefully a little bit more just transparency around what's happening this year. But for next year, we'll certainly want to have a better sense of what it is we want to accomplish by sending folks on behalf of the OpenJS Foundation to events like TPAC or to working group meeting or TC39. And we'll need to work with the CPC to sort of plan out what we think you know, that ask should be. So that is that, and I'm just, you know, curious if y'all have questions or thoughts or concerns about this particular item for now, or it just seems fine and, you know, good enough.
I don't have any thoughts other than no idea how to manage that.
I kind of missed that. You said no thoughts.
No thoughts beyond I have no idea how I would manage that. Other than rely on smarter people who do this sort of thing, like you all. Okay.
Well, I'll just make sure that it's at least, you know, part of our the conversation, and I think this is probably something just more to talk about in terms of like our own group, and talking about what we expect or what we would like to be able to do. You know, if it's, for example, we'd like to be able to send one representative of the OpenJS Foundation to, you know, TPAC or to the W3CAC meeting or to a working group meeting or to TC39 meetings moving forward, you know, whatever that sort of desire is, we should try and figure out what that is, and then we can kind of work backwards from there, what the possible resource need would be. But this was something that had been raised. I didn't want it to be dropped, and I'm sure we can just move on from it. Okay, groovy. So the last item that I wanted to put up was the TPAC is coming up in September, the middle week of September to be almost exact. I think that's the week of the 15th or so. I'm super curious to know if if there's anyone here who is already planning to attend TPAC, regardless of.
Hi, I will be there. I have my travel and hotel and everything already booked.
Yeah, same.
I will be there too, but I haven't booked anything yet, but we'll do that soon.
Oh, was that Christian or Emily?
That was me, Christian.
Okay. Christian, Miles, Brian. I will be attending as well.
What might be useful, I only have so many working groups and community groups that I participate in, but there's a lot of stuff going on. So perhaps what we can do is open an issue with the schedule and allow people to make like requests of meetings they'd like people to attend, maybe take notes on, or bring specific ideas to, because there's at least one day where I just kind of added the things I was interested in. But if there's meetings that would be meaningful for me to attend on behalf of someone, I'd be happy to be a proxy.
Yeah, I second that. I just have to attend one working group meeting on Thursday and Friday, and can be flexible on the other days too.
Yeah, I have meetings that have to be in pretty much the whole week, but if they correspond with something I can say in one of those or advocate, then I would be happy to.
And this is also an opportunity to schedule like a pre-meeting too for OpenJSFers. Okay, well, those were the items that I had. I think there are other items.
Yep. So the other item on the list is like how often we are going to meet, whether it's a weekly, bi-weekly, or some other time and day. It's open for discussion.
Weekly seems excessive, but I don't know.
I agree.
Yes, I do agree with that. Probably we can meet once in 2 weeks.
I've set a recurring, like the webinar that we're on right now that will always use the same URL. I set as a recurring bi-weekly meeting.
I like how Miles made the decision ahead of time because he knew what it would end up as.
Perfect. Recurring bi-weekly on Tuesdays at 2 o'clock EST, which I don't.
8 o'clock CEST, 10 o'clock UTC.
Perfect.
Wow.
Done.
Hang on, going back on that, could we please fix it so it's locked onto the UTC rather than the Central European time, given that that's going to confuse things with the, whatever you call it, the period of a couple of weeks in the fall when the US and Europe switch at different times to winter time.
Yeah, what I'll do is I will follow up. Michael Dawson has a tool that automatically generates the meeting agendas. So I will follow up with a pull request to his tool to add this meeting as one of them. And then it should just work. And that will have all the times put down centered around UTC.
Thank you.
Yay. Okay. So I think this decision is done. We will go to the next part, the questions. Basically, I had a few questions. I think we have also discussed something similar to that before, like the buddy system, for example, but how easy for us to get started with the standard stuff, and also what do we have to do actually? So that is the question that I have. We don't have any kind of like any starting material or something, I just looked up out on the repo and then went to JS Foundation and saw there, here and there. But I think there are a lot of informal contents there, but is there any way to formalize this thing or any plans to do that stuff? That's the question, basically.
So I recall from the Collaborators Summit conversation that there was a request for more like resources and reading and that kind of stuff for like getting started with standards and helping people sort of contextualize what the formal standards process is for web professionals. And that is that there's a lot of stuff out there, and I think we can certainly start to create a piece of the repository that has the like links and documents saved, so that folks can navigate there and like learn what all of this is from like a meta level, I suppose. What is a standard, that kind of thing. If that would be helpful.
Like definitely that would be more than helpful, because, okay, so for somebody like me who haven't attended a lot of TC39 meetings or W3C meetings, and also haven't connected that much, it's like sometimes you need to have some guidance to get things started and get rolling. I think that would be really grateful if we have something on that side to get it started.
One other aspect that been thinking about it in my head during this meeting is how do we really want to present ourselves both to these standards bodies as well as to the JavaScript developer audience more at large who might be interested in joining the OpenJS Foundation or otherwise? Is that, are we really just pitching ourselves as representing the specific JavaScript libraries and tools that are a part of the foundation, or would it make sense for us to effectively pitch the OpenJS Foundation as carrying the voice of JavaScript library developers in general?
I think that is a really excellent question, and I was trying to figure out when was the good opportunity to ask exactly the same question. Like historically, at least, like the roots of the JSF was very much that. So that feels like a good thing, but it also feels a little bit more difficult to actively manage that you are representing just every person. But it is really a good question that I would like to answer as well.
Maybe this is also something that we want to define as a quote working group.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, this is not an issue that extends just to this standards team or whatever this is called, but it's, I think, more about the OpenJS Foundation as a whole, because effectively, it doesn't make sense for the standards team to have a specific sort of public relations line on what the foundation is for that is different from what the foundation otherwise says.
I think this is a great question, and certainly a tricky one, because I think we want to balance the ability of each individual project to really shine and, take all of the, credit and benefit and, cachet that they can, because that's what the foundation is for. It's for supporting the projects. And not necessarily to be the lead singer. We want the projects to be the lead singers, plural. But in the case of providing a forum for these kinds of larger conversations that impact everybody in the ecosystem, it helps to be able to say to the other groups that we interface with at the W3C or elsewhere, you know, hey, we're the OpenJS Foundation and we're acting kind of in block. So there's a bit of a balance to strike, and that will be really interesting to figure out what it is.
I mean, especially as you say, with things that affect the whole community, because this is the standards group, and like as much as we can find a thing that we all agree on and like advocate for it together and work out the details and the proposals and make sure that like we have a lot of benefit from it, like it has to be for everybody. And so being able to include the voices of everybody is also a really useful thing. I don't know if that makes any sense outside of.
I think this correlates pretty well with the discussion otherwise that's recently going about this. What does observer status mean, for instance?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that even partially helps define even an answer possibly for this, that yes, we want to represent everyone. Specifically, we're representing these projects. Please join us if you think that you would like to also be represented, sort of, because it is a bit of a marketing pitch as well.
I just realized it is 2 till the top of the hour, and I do have a hard stop at 3. So I wondered if somebody would mind taking over on the notes front in case you want to continue the conversation.
I think I can take over the notes part if there is anything to be added over here.
Awesome, thank you. I'll drop now and just say thanks for the conversation. I look forward to working with you all on this stuff.
Thank you. See you.
Awesome.
So, is there anything that we're going to add to this?
That was my question as well. I think we may have covered most of the things that, or practically everything that was on the agenda.
Yes, I think practically everything is added. And there was like one other question that I also added, like the specification writing and workshop. I think that we can discuss it later, probably on the repo, create an issue. So if there is any other thing the group wants to discuss, we can continue or we can adjourn the meeting.
Since we're at the time, I think we should adjourn the meeting. One thing also worth mentioning, I will make a label called Standards Agenda that I open the PR to auto-generate all the meetings. Mm-hmm. And whatever we add the Standards Agenda label to will automatically be pulled into those meeting notes that are created. So I'll follow up with Michael and make sure that that lands, but all subsequent meetings should be auto-generated. The only thing that we will want to do, and someone else can maybe pick up on this, is I won't be around a lot during the summer to kick off and handle the Zoom stream. So we'll want to just make sure that other people have the credentials.
I could opt in for that. I can volunteer for that if that's okay.
Okay, cool. I'm going to stop the